All right, well, in the interest of time, since we started streaming live, and we have a lot of wonderful speakers today, so we want to make sure that we get to all of our speakers and the questions we've got for our panel. I will get things started. Welcome, everyone. I'm Jessica Paine. I am Director of Community Programs at the Cleveland Metropolitan Bar Association, and also liaison to our Inclusion and Diversity Committee. I'm going to very quickly kick it off to Awatef Assad, who is our Vice Chair of the Inclusion and Diversity Committee and moving up to Chair and Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion next year for the bar. And we just want to thank you all for being here. I cannot thank our panelists enough for joining us today. This is something that has been in the news and in everybody's mind for many, many years, but of course, the instigating incident for us pulling this panel together was the violence in Atlanta, Georgia against Asian Americans. And we thought the time is ripe again to check in with our friends at the Infinity Bars and of the bar membership and check in with their experiences. What I would love to do really quickly is just remind everybody, if this discussion today or anything else that's going on inspires you to get involved, I'm putting into our chat right now a link to where on our Bar Association website, we have more about the racial equity and the law efforts, otherwise known as REAL, how you can get involved with work groups, and we would love to have your participation. And this is open to anybody, members of the public, a legal profession, anybody who wants to make a real change. So I will kick it over to Awatef. Before I do so, I want to encourage everybody, please. We've got a lot of people joining us today, so we would love to have this be a conversation. Join us by chat. Join us by using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We're also on Facebook Live, so if you have questions there, please do let us know. We definitely want to make this a conversation. So thank you, and Awatef.
Thank you, Jessica, and thank you for all you do. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Cleveland Metropolitan Bar Association. Today, we stand in solidarity with the Asian American community. We thank the bars of color for their sponsorship and support. And a big shout out to Dominica Essie, the CMBA Sections and CLE Coordinator, for organizing us in 2 weeks. In the wake of the horrific shootings in Atlanta and the rising tide of discrimination and violence against the Asian American community, we knew we needed to do something collaboratively to show how much we care. And as evidenced by today's participation, this shows you care too. We are all interconnected. Rumi said, "You are not a drop in the ocean. You are the ocean in the drop." We are each the community. When one of us hurts, we all hurt. When one of us advances, our community thrives. As lawyers, we can use our powers for good to effectuate meaningful change on a local, state, and federal level. If we band together, collectively, we can use our skills to advance social justice and build a more equitable community, one that provides equal access to education, employment, and opportunities to grow and thrive without regard to race, ethnicity, national origin, sexual orientation, gender, disability, or age. So be that change. Lawyers and non-lawyers, join one of the CMBA's nationally recognized racial equality in the law real working group, as Jessica described. You will hear from David Valent and Tera Coleman, co-chairs of the White Allyship Real Working Group. Latha Srinivasan will lead today's discussion. Latha is an HR compliance attorney with First Energy. She is an active member of the CMBA. Latha is known for her fairness and is an advocate for social justice. So let us begin. Please welcome Latha Srinivasan. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Awatef, for those wonderful comments. I'm so honored and privileged to be moderating this extremely important panel today. What I would like to do is to have the panelists quickly introduce themselves before we launch in to today's discussion. I'm just going to go in the order that you appear on my screen. So just a quick introduction to our attendees today. I will start with you, David.
Thank you. My name is David Valent. I'm a senior counsel at the Cleveland Clinic. I'm proud to be here today, and I'm proud to be part of the Real Equity and Law initiative through the CMBA and to be on the allyship committee and co-chair that with Tera Coleman who's here today as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Tera.
Hi, I'm Tera Coleman. I'm an associate at BakerHostetler in white collar and commercial litigation. Happy to be here today. And as Dave said, I am co-chair of the White Allyship Committee of the CMBA's Real Initiative. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. Eddie.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Eddie Jun. The CHY makes a J sound. And it has an interesting story because I immigrated here when I was 9, and the president of Korea at the time had the same last name, but spelled it without the Y. So my dad threw in the Y. So from 9 on, everybody's been butchering my name, but that's part of my identity and culture. And I'm a shareholder at a law firm called Littler Mendelson, which is an international labor and employment management firm only. We only represent management. I am the co-chair of the firm's Diversity and Inclusion Council. I'm also the co-chair of our affinity group for Asian, South Asian, Middle Eastern, North African attorneys called OHANA in corporate world, the Employee Resource Group. I'm happy to be here. I'm very grateful for CMBA to put on this presentation and looking forward to having a wonderful discussion with everybody.
Thank you. Jath.
Hi, my name is Jath Shao. I'm of counsel with the Herman legal group. I'm an immigration attorney, and I'm actually an immigrant myself. And I'm also one of the founding affinity bar in Ohio and Filipino American bars as well.
All righty, thank you very much. Arthur.
Hi, everyone. This is Arthur Chan. I'm a diversity, equity, and inclusion strategist. My background is actually in clinical psychology. I'm an immigrant myself as well. It's an honor to be here today.
Thank you so much for being here. We are so lucky and honored to have you with us today, Arthur. Elaine.
Hi, everyone. Elaine Shao. I'm the CEO at Asian Services in Action and an attorney. We at Asia are the largest organization in Ohio serving Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. Happy to be here.
Thank you so much, Elaine. And finally, last but not least, my old and wonderful friend, we go back a long ways, Sonja.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much to the CMBA for hosting this. Thrilled to be here. My name is Sonja Rice. I'm an attorney at Hahn, Loeser, and Parks here in Cleveland, where I serve on the steering committee for the Women's Leadership Initiative. I also serve on the board of trustees of the Asian American Bar Association of Ohio, along with my co-trustees, Eddie and Elaine. Thanks so much for having me today.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for those wonderful introductions. We have an amazing panel today, really amazing. Before we get started though, Jath wants to share a quick introduction to the historical laws and cases relating to racism against Asians in the United States so that we can set a backdrop to the context of today's discussion. So with that, I'm just going to give it to Jath to talk about that. Thank you.
Hi, so being that we're all lawyers, I figured it'd be instructive to start from the laws. So the first immigration law was when the Constitution gave Congress the power to establish a uniform rule of naturalization. But when they actually started making the laws, the first Naturalization Act limited to only free white men who could prove a certain number of years in residency. You would apply and then swear an oath of allegiance before a judge. And this is something that still happens today. All the rules, everything that happens today has a historical context. After this, specifically against Asians, the Asians have been here since, before even the Declaration of Independence. There were Filipino settlers in the 1700s. Chinese people came in the 1800s. And in 1854, there was a California Supreme Court case that ruled that Asians, their testimony had no weight in court because they were inferior race and who were incapable of intellectual development. And after this, the first restrictive act the first restrictive federal immigration law was targeted against Asians. It was the Page Act of 1875 that characterized all women as Asian women as having immoral purposes. So because of this, we have questions about sex trafficking when you apply for a visa, when you apply for entry. Further on, you have the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882 that barred almost all Asians for a long time, even though there was there were Asians here, and there was a Supreme Court case, U.S. v. Wong Kim Ark, that decided that birthright citizenship for everyone who was born in the U.S., regardless of nationality. So all these things lead to where we're at today. How people get separated, interrogated, and it's just, if anyone wants to know more, I guess I have a lot more that could be its own hour, but I don't want to take up too much time. So my point is, I guess, the racism and misogyny has been built into the laws. Before 1855, women didn't have citizenship. And when they did have citizenship, it was based on that of their father or their husband. It wasn't until 1922 that women could have their own citizenship. So all of this is, it leads up to where we are today. There's a long history. And to me, the big thing is it's in our laws. It's one thing that for society for things to happen in society to be in our laws is it's instructive to learn.
Okay. Yes, thank you so much, Jath, for pointing out that, racism is unfortunately built into the systems that run our country, and that is what we are fighting against to change. And thank you so much for that insight. So my first question to the panelists can be answered in two ways. You can either share at least one experience, either professional or personal, in which you or someone you know experienced racism because of being Asian, or you can share an experience or your thoughts about being an ally to the Asian American community. And I'm going to just open it up to the panelists, whoever would like to chime in and start the discussion. Or I can call on someone.
I guess I'll go first. So I, like I said, I immigrated here when I was 9. I grew up in LA. And in 2000, I moved to Columbus, Ohio to go to law school, figuring, hey, I'll go to Columbus, Ohio State for 3 years and I'll move back to California. Little did I know 21 years later, I'll still be here. But one of the things that I wanted to do when I went to law school was be a prosecutor. I had worked in the LA DA's office and I'd done a lot of things. Now I'm in labor and employment law, but that's another story for another day. But so I took all these, like my 3rd year in law school, I took all these clinical classes where you could get real life experience. One of the classes I had taken was, I did the prosecution clinic, the defense clinic, I did the civil clinic. And I was in a prosecution clinic and we were desperately trying to get a case to trial, because I think the teachers wanted somebody to have, at least get to a trial so people could watch. So they picked up a case, and me and a white fellow law student of ours drove up to Delaware to interview a witness. This was, I don't even remember what the case was about. It was like 20 years ago, but it was a couple of high school kids who were witness to something. So we drove up to Delaware, went to their house, knocked on their door. They came out and we told them, hey, we had made this, we had an appointment to talk to you about all this stuff. So we went through the interview process. After the interview, the parents came out. The kids went back inside and we were talking to the parents about what the next step was, what was entailed in the case, and where we see the case going. And I swear, I heard from inside the house, the kids we were just interviewing, the kids that we needed for the the case we're going to be prosecuting, yelling out, "Ching Chong, Chinaman, don't talk to the Chinaman. You shouldn't be talking to the Chinaman," and stuff like that through the window. And I remember thinking, am I hearing things or what is this? We finished up with the parents. We got in the car. I remember looking at my fellow law student, my co-counsel, and saying, "Hey, did you hear that?" And he said, "What?" So I explained it to him. He's like, "I thought I heard something like that, but I wasn't sure." Right. So we went back, and we didn't go to trial. Something happened and the case settled. But I remember at the clinic, we raised it with them and we had a discussion about it. But there wasn't real solution, right? It was more like, hey, you're gonna, unfortunately, you being Asian, you're gonna face that kind of stuff. And especially because it was in Delaware, which is, I guess, a little bit of a suburb from, Columbus, which is a bigger city. But I just remember kind of having that rude awakening, like, wow, even when I'm practicing law and even when I'm going to have a witness who I'm going to need to help with my case, yelling out these, and my co-counsel later on did pull me aside and say, "Hey, I'm sorry, I should have said something, and that kind of stuff." But, you kind of freeze because you don't know, like, this is a witness you need for a case and you're hearing these things. So what do you do? So, that was one of my first experience, I guess, in law school and trying to figure out what I wanted to do. That wasn't why I didn't become a prosecutor, but, that I'm just, that's just a little story that I have that resonates as a beginning lawyer.
Eddie, thank you so much for sharing that. It's a moving story, and I think, unfortunately, many young lawyers of color could probably relate to that story, including myself. So thank you so much for opening up and sharing that with us today.
And I think what was so, one of the important concepts that comes out of your story is the colleague that you were with and the opportunity that arose there for allyship. And allyship is so important because to make a true change requires the participation of those that are not in the oppressed group. And one thing that I want to touch on, while allyship is important, another part of Eddie's story is, okay, they went back to the law school, discussed this, and nothing really happened, right? What we have to be wary of is performative allyship. Performative allyship is essentially saying you're against something, but not having substantive change behind that. So an example could be, making a social media post without an actual call to action or a way for people to engage and be helpful. And that is harmful to communities because it gives the impression that something of substance is happening, but there's no substance behind it. And so we stay at the status quo. So that's why performative allyship is so dangerous, although true allyship is so important to make true change. And so I just wanted to touch on that because, that kind of came out in Eddie's story where there was an opportunity for allies to step up and rise to the occasion.
I have a similar story to share that touches upon what Tera was describing in terms of how communities that are not the oppressed community can truly step up and stand up for someone who is experiencing harassment or racism. And this story is one that I personally experienced with racism. I was in a grocery store and I was on the customer side of a meat counter in a grocery store. And the worker on the store side of the meat counter was a person of another color. As I started to request the item that I wanted from the meat counter, and even before I could even get those words out, the grocery store worker said out loud, "Sorry, ma'am, we don't sell dog here." And I was utterly shocked at the words that were said to me. so much so that I was uncharacteristically silent as the grocery store worker laughed at her own comment. And even though I had a cart full of groceries, I just left everything there and exited the grocery store. And keep in mind that this encounter, while you might think that it happened in 2021 or 2020 in the context of the coronavirus or something along those lines, it didn't. This incident happened in the early 2000s, and that particular grocery store chain eventually left Northeast Ohio. Now, in that incident, no one stood up for me in the grocery store, and some of the other customers in the store might have even laughed at that grocery store worker's comment. Ultimately, because I had left the space where the incident occurred, I did not report it, and I didn't come back. I didn't come back and report it. I just stopped going to that grocery store chain. And, in hindsight, I wish that I had reported it, because in order for a problem to be addressed, there needs to be an acknowledgement that the problem exists and that the problem persists. Otherwise, we can't address it. And to Tera's point, it takes courage. It takes courage to stand up for another person who, in the situation with Eddie's story, there was a person who had, additional privilege in that setting and could have stood up for him. And same in my situation. It takes courage to stand up for another person. And that's what it will take to stop the harassment and racism that has been going on for such a long time in this country.
Thank you so much, Elaine. While we're on this topic, I want to ask a question that has been posed by one of our viewers. And the viewer is asking, and kind of goes with what Elaine was talking about. Are there things we can do if we witness something like Eddie's story? Are there some more resources with which we can engage to learn? And I'm wondering if any of the panelists have any suggestions for this viewer and our other viewers about resources that they have used in the past that they have found helpful, or recommendations that they know about. Would anyone like to chime in on that?
Yes, I would. There are a number of resources. I mean, I know the Asian American Bar Association of Ohio, we are going to be posting a list of resources on our website if we haven't already. But one resource in particular I'd really like to mention is bystander intervention training. There are a number of organizations that are conducting bystander intervention training. One that I want to mention in particular, because it's being done in conjunction with Asian Americans Advancing Justice, or AAJC, is through hollaback.org. And I believe in the chat there may be available a link to the website where you can learn more about this training. Hollaback is giving free training sessions, each of them is an hour long, about what to do if you are a bystander and you witness harassment or violence against somebody. The training is very effective. It's very simple. The sessions really arm you with concrete things that you can do that do not necessarily involve endangering yourself or running for public office. I mean, these are real tangible things that you can do if you see somebody being harassed in a grocery store, if you see somebody being spat on in public transit. They are also offering training sessions for those who are victims of harassment and discrimination, ways for you. They provide a lot of tips for defending your own boundaries, again, safely, and maintaining resilience in the face of harassment and racism. So for sure, if anyone's interested, I highly recommend the free training that's available through Hollaback. And again, these are concrete ways that you can assist or intervene or do something to help if you see something like this happening. So many times I hear from people, what can I do to help? I think there's a lot of a sense of helplessness, right? You don't want to do something that's going to endanger your own life or that of your kids if you're out in public with your children. But the training does give you some great tips for real things that you can do.
That training sounds terrific. I was going to add just one more resource that is something that everyone can potentially access and is a starting point. I've seen in the chats here and just by participating today as an audience member, the reality is many of you are probably wanting to be allies and wanting to do more and wanting to know what that looks like.
David, you've muted yourself. David.
Oh, thank you. Sorry. So if you were to read just one quick resource that Tera and I have come across, it's the Harvard Business Review article, Be a Better Ally. And they list 7 or 8 ways that someone who's starting to educate themselves, that wants to make a difference, that wants to be an active ally rather than a performative ally, but actually make a change. One of the suggestions is see something, say something. And it's just that simple. When we hear these stories, you know, I'm sure perhaps looking back on it, the people involved to witness those events wish they would have done more. And if you educate yourself in the ways that we're all trying to do, hopefully we can be better allies in the future.
I think, you know, I mean, that's nice sometimes, but as lawyers, we have to recognize that the power that we have to work through the legal system. So I have kind of a combination story. To me, couple of weeks ago, I was in court and, you know, I needed to file something and the guard would not let me file. He said, I don't want you walking around spreading your germs. And this is in the courtroom. And so, you know what I mean? I had my client right there. It probably wouldn't have been productive for me to go in there and, you know, try to tear down the system. But, you know, I just had to remain professional, you know, do what I do, you know, go through the hearing, represent my client. And then, you know, but it just strikes me, you know, when these things happen in the very places where we access justice, you know, when you know, what if I had, you know, gone crazy and, you know, something happened in my client's case because of that. You know, it's just, there are ways for us to work within the system, to work within our laws and to make sure that, you know, maybe take a pro bono case here or there, you know, or offer your expertise to someone who can't afford your services, you know. If you can't, maybe point them to resources who can, you know, like a nonprofit or maybe like a classmate from law school that, you know, does civil rights law or something else, you know, if you think that there's a cause of action, like we have to do something through the power that we have as attorneys. You know, that's kind of where my point is.
Mm-hmm. You know, and that actually leads us perfectly into another question we have from another attendee, from Philip. And he says that he's a litigator and he thinks that his highest and best use in this issue, in this space, would be the fact that he's a litigator. And he's asking the panelists for ideas on how he could get involved in this way. And if there are any organizations that he could contact to get involved in this way. And I know that Sonja, when you were speaking, you mentioned that the Asian American Bar Association is going to be having a list of, you know, organizations. So I wonder if you could provide the URL for the AABA, or if, you know, or any other organizations that you think a litigator would be able to liaise with to see how they can help in this way. So Sonja or anyone else.
Yes, I'd actually like to respond, not necessarily on behalf of the Asian American Bar Association, but there will, if not already on the website, be available those resources to connect. I'm responding on behalf of the organization that I lead, Asian Services in Action. So ways, and also the fact that I'm a former litigator. I don't litigate as much now because I'm too busy with the organization. But as an organization that is serving the largest number of Asian American and Pacific Islanders in the state of Ohio, we can get involved as a party, you know, to impact litigation. And we are often looking for pro bono litigation partners in this space to assist us on impact litigation. The reason why an organization such as Asian Services in Action would need to be the party plaintiff in such a matter would be because we are serving the community, and we have the reach to the communities that might have a direct impact. You know, if there is some sort of representative profile plaintiff involved in the case. But on top of that, as an organization, it is important to reflect the harm that is caused. You know, because as you know, in litigation, there has to be some harm shown, and the harm to organizations serving these populations can be seen in the additional resources that need to be incurred and spent in order to address these issues. And as an organization, you know, if there are, you know, crimes of violence against any member of the community that we're serving, you know, we are there. We are providing victims of crime services to the Asian American community. And but again, we can't address those issues if we're not aware of those issues. Someone needs to report the incidents that are happening. And across the country, there are a number of organizations that are collecting these reports of anti-Asian violence and harassment. And you know, as the database grows bigger and bigger, you know, there's been nearly 4,000 reports over the past year during the pandemic reflecting these types of hate crimes. Now, you know, being the individual that I am, and knowing the community that we're serving at Asian Services in Action, I know that 4,000 reports of incidents of this type is not nearly the true number of cases, because most of the time, people of Asian heritage are extremely reticent to report any type of incident because they don't want to make waves. They don't want to bring attention to their family or bring attention to themselves. And that's you know, that has a negative impact on making change, because, you know, silence is not an option in situations like this, and people need to open up their voice and state what is happening, because like we've all been saying around this panel, we cannot address a situation without acknowledgement of its seriousness and its existence. So I will drop in the chat some of those resources now.
Thank you so much for that insight. You know, I want to bring in, I'm going to call on Arthur. I said I wouldn't call on people, but I really want to bring in his voice to this. He hasn't had a chance to speak yet. And, you know, he brings a really valuable perspective. He works in this space and he's of Asian descent himself. And I want to ask Arthur, you know, his thoughts on what he feels. Where are we right now in this space? What can we do, whether we identify as Asian American or whether we identify as an ally to the Asian American community? Since I know you're on the forefront, what are your thoughts and what are your recommendations on how we can move forward during this difficult time?
Thank you, Latha. I feel like one of the things I want to speak on is about allyship. You know, because allyship actually, you know, people don't exactly know what that is. I know there's a speaker before kind of mentioned about performative allyship, right? So basically, allyship actually requires an awareness and understanding of the unequal distribution of power, because it's all about power dynamics and, you know, and the privilege, you know, among different cultural groups in the society. So I feel like it is important to note that allyship is not charity work, and it is not about sympathizing or patronizing specific identity groups, but about taking steps to actually promote fairness, inclusion, and psychological safety for those who are less privileged and unfairly treated. So I feel like that's the essence about allyship. Oftentimes, one of the things when I talk about, standing solidarity with the Asian community, that oftentimes it could go into like a completely opposite direction. Because then my experience is that there are other racialized group that they would say things like, oh, why do we have to stand with Asians? They benefit from, the white privilege because of their white adjacent privilege and whatnot. So I feel like one of the things is that as Asian community, first of all, we actually have to take steps to disrupt the model minority myth. That's one piece, because a lot of the tension, interracial tension, for example, Asian with the Black community or Asian with the Hispanic Latinx community, it all stems from the model minority myth. And the model minority myth actually stems from white supremacy. So I feel like when we talk about standing in solidarity with Asians or having other marginalized community to kind of support us and to disrupt racism, we have to first address white supremacy, which is kind of like the foundation of this nation. So this is one of the things that I oftentimes encourage people to really think about, in terms of allyship and anti-racism.
Yes, and on that, I actually wanted to just quickly recommend a book that I'm reading right now, and it's called Me and White Supremacy, and it is targeted for white people. It's also helpful, though, for me to read it as a person of color. I would highly recommend for anyone to read that book. It is more of a self-exploration book. It's not really like a book club book where you talk and chat. It is looking into yourself and recognizing what you feel about certain topics. And so I just wanted to recommend that on the coattails of Arthur's comments. It's just a really good book, and it's called Me and White Supremacy, and you can get it in audio format. There's also a workbook that comes with that. There are prompts that you get at the end of every chapter that encourages you to do some introspection and come up with some thoughts and action plans for yourself. Yes, thank you, Sonja. Sonja has put the link in the chat. So highly recommend that book, especially because it's an introspective book and you can feel uncomfortable in the comfort of your own house or your own car, in my opinion, in my experience when I was driving. So just a thought on that, because I think Arthur hit it on the head. So I wanted to circle back to talking about, well, we've talked about some resources and organizations that you can go to for these things, but I wanted to circle back on if anyone had any other personal experiences, either as someone who identifies as Asian American or as an ally, because I know that you all have had different experiences. And I want to, we kind of had some really good conversation after we started that, but I want to make sure that whoever wanted to speak on that had a chance to speak about what they have faced, either as an ally or as the target of such action. Is there anyone who wants to share something that we haven't shared yet? Okay.
Latha, I will say that I think in part, the silence isn't because we don't have stories to share. In fact, what's so difficult is that I think the silence is in large part because every single one of us has multiple stories, and we could probably take over the rest of the day sharing stories. And some of these stories are really difficult to share. And sometimes I think it's hard also to know when something has happened, like Eddie's story, that I think a lot of us struggle with knowing when to say that this was actually an act of discrimination and when it was just kids being kids, right? So it's not that there aren't, we all have stories, and sadly, I think we have almost too many of them.
I mean, to give a professional context to some of these stories, and for it not to be kids just being kids, because I have hundreds of those stories about someone accusing me of not being able to speak English, and so on and so on. But to put a professional context on this topic, you know, I'll share my own experience as an attorney. You know, for a long time I was a product liability attorney before I took on this new role at Asia. And you know, there was a time when I went to a like a failure analysis meeting, you know, for one of the cases that I was working on. And, you know, I showed up and you know, I was late. I was late for the meeting because I had to park like so far away, and then I had to trek myself to the meeting. And then I came in, and I kind of in a huff, I dropped my bag down and I said, I'm so sorry I'm late. You know, hopefully I didn't hold up the analysis. And all the attorneys around the table looked at me and said, well, thank goodness you're here. Now we can get started. And I said, oh, well, were you waiting? Is the scientist already here? You're just waiting for me to arrive. And then, you know, one of the attorneys said, oh, we thought you were the scientist, you know, to evaluate the sample. And I said, no, I'm the attorney representing, you know, such and such company. And, you know, in that professional context, I mean, someone could say, well, but they were giving you a positive stereotype. They assumed that you were the scientist, you know, evaluating the product sample. Yeah, but you need to take a look at it in another way, right? I mean, it was kind of also a negative stereotype that they viewed me as not possibly being able to be one of the attorneys representing you know, one of the companies in the case. So, and that can have harmful impacts in so many different ways. I know that Arthur touched upon the model minority aspect of things, and you know, that has harmful effects as well. So, you know, when you view someone as a model minority, then you're not acknowledging that there are other issues. You know, to the extent that, you know, someone may know a successful Asian, then they think, oh, well, Asians aren't struggling. There's no struggle for Asians. But I can tell you as the person that is, you know, leading the largest organization serving, you know, Asians in Ohio, there are issues. And, you know, the only way to address them is to uncover them and acknowledge that they exist.
Thank you so much. And, you know, to that point, I want to ask the panel if they have any thoughts on this. What advice, and specifically regarding in the context of the model minority and, you know, Asian Americans kind of being pegged to be, you know, math, science people. Obviously, Asian Americans are in all the different professions, just like any other race. What advice do you have for younger professionals to help them navigate through microaggressions and other challenges? You know, maybe things that happened to you when you were a younger professional, and, you know, looking back with 2020 hindsight, you know, what advice do you have for up and coming AAPI professionals on how to address these things in a manner that is effective and timely, instead of, you know, 15 years later thinking, oh, wow, you know, that was a racist comment. That was a racist act. Anyone have any advice for young up and coming AAPI professionals on how to deal with these things?
This isn't going to sound like very concrete advice, but I will say one of the most important things you can do is to join an organization, whether it's a minority bar association, whether it's an organization like Asia, join an organization of others who are in a similar situation. I will speak personally and say that it took me a long time to find my voice. And finding my voice came as part of being an active member of the Asian American Bar Association of Ohio and other organizations where I felt that it was safe for me to share my stories. And I think it's through community sometimes that we find personal strength and professional strength, and we find our voice. But until you have that, a sense of safety and community where you can speak up, I think it's hard to take any next steps in terms of either standing up for yourself or taking steps to protect the profession. So I think community is really important as a starting point.
Thank you for that. We do have another question in the chat by a viewer, and I think that this itself could take up another hour conversation, but it's a good question. It's an uncomfortable question, but an important question. And so I want to present it to the panel. And the question is, how do we bridge the gap and promote reciprocal allyship among communities of color that have had historically complicated relationships? So I'll give a couple seconds for someone to gather their thoughts, because that is a very complicated question with a complicated answer. Anyone have any thoughts on that?
I think, so allyship, we have to think of, it's not just, while white allyship is important, okay, we can also think of allyship in terms of interracially. And so I think those key concepts that apply to dismantling white supremacy, that apply to our white counterparts, like allyship 101, I think each race has to also apply those concepts so that we can be allies for each other. So as a Black woman, it's on me to kind of do those allyship 101 things so that I can be a good ally to my Asian American counterparts. And one of the key things, I think the very first step to allyship is to educate yourself. And one of the most important things of educating yourself is making sure that you are not putting the burden on your Asian American friends to educate you. That simply furthers the inequity, right? You cannot rely on the oppressed group to take on the burden of getting you up to speed on how to not oppress them. And so I think, so Dave mentioned the How to Be a Better Ally article by the Harvard Business Review. One of those things is own your privilege. And so as a Black woman, it's not, I don't have, white privilege, but in order to help my Asian Americans, I have to, own up to that, educate myself on those things. And so that's just one of the things that I do want to say is so important is educate yourself, and it has to be something that you take ownership of. And I think that's something that applies to all races so that we can be allies for each other.
Yes, absolutely. You just hit it on that. That was an amazing answer. I 100% agree. That being said, does anybody have any kind of favorite resources that they have found as far as educating oneself on the topics of privilege, whether it be white privilege or other privilege, white fragility, white supremacy? I know that I already shared a book that I highly recommend. And we do have a lot of people that are asking, where can I go? What can I do? What can I read? And I think Tera is absolutely correct. Educating yourself is the first step. And, people want to know, but where is a good place to start? And I want to know if people have any kind of favorite resources that they can recommend for starting to educate oneself. Any thoughts on that? that we haven't talked about already? Arthur, I know this is what you do. So what are some places that you send people, when they so desperately want to help and want to educate themselves?
Actually, I have a couple of articles that I can share, but I need some time to put them up. So I will put it on the chat box.
All right, that sounds great. I'm just looking in the chat here to see. Okay, great. All right, we have a few more minutes, and I wanted to be able to kind of open it up to the panel on any concluding thoughts that you may want to share, either talking about something that we've talked about today and furthering that topic, or sharing another experience that you've had as an ally or otherwise, or just some thoughts that you would like individuals to consider and think on before we say goodbye. I won't call on people.
Just even something just so similar, as simple as getting somebody's name right. Like a lot of times, like we have a Starbucks name and like that we just say because we don't want people to have to. I mean, I'm sure you can relate and Eddie can relate. Like Eddie had a whole story about where his name. But I mean, it's just if you work with someone, get to know them. Say their name right. Like I have to admit, like earlier in my career, like I would just let it go if like somebody higher up than me could not say my name. I just, but now I probably shouldn't have. And I just hope in the future, like whichever side, whatever race you're from, get to know people, like for who they are. They're more than just a stereotype. Not all Asians are smart. Not all X or Y or whatever stereotype is out there. Get to know people on a personal level.
Yeah, and I know I'm a moderator, but I have to share this story because it's about the whole name thing. So in high school, I was the typical stereotype, straight A's, like never got in trouble and never got detention. And I was a senior, and it was like a month before graduation, and I got called by the principal to his office. I was terrified. I was like, what could I have possibly done? I mean, I was like, poster child for like, this is the perfect high school scene. I was like, what the heck did I do? And I was like shaking, going down the hallway. I'd never even seen the inside of his office before. And I like, the secretary was like, you may go in. And I was like, oh my God. I sat down and he's like, hey, how are you? And I'm like, I'm fine. And I was like, I can't even imagine. And he was like, I just want to know how to pronounce your name so that when I call it at graduation, I have it right. And I was like, that's it. And I was just, totally expecting something else. And I didn't think much of it then because I was just relieved that I wasn't in trouble. But, that was high school graduation. And that was one of the most thoughtful, nicest things that someone who doesn't know how to pronounce my name has done for me. And it was such a simple thing for him to do. Literally, he was like, can you pronounce your name? And he's like, can you please write it down on this piece of paper phonetically for me? That was all he wanted. And, as Jath said, it's a simple thing to do. And that was so much better than him butchering it on stage at my high school graduation and embarrassing me, embarrassing my parents, and calling attention to the fact that I have a name that is a foreign name, even though I'm born and raised here, foreign name, because I'm not, Jane Doe. So I had to insert that story because it's a simple thing. Always, just ask the person how to pronounce their name instead of laughing about it when you're introducing them, because when you laugh at their name, you're laughing at them. And it's just a nice thing to do. So anyway, anyone else have some closing thoughts that you'd like to share? We still have a few minutes.
Latha and Jath, you've both pointed to something really, really important, and something that I think as lawyers we fully appreciate, understand, and are responsible for, and that's that words matter, right? And Latha, in terms of like, being laughed at or something because you have a funny name or whatever it is, I've heard too many times recently, people try to justify their use of terms like Kung flu or Wuhan flu as being funny, right? Oh, I didn't really mean it. It was just a joke, you know, come on, lighten up. It's just Kung flu. I'm just making a joke. But words matter. We as attorneys, we know this, right? This is our craft. This is what we do. And words, terms like Wuhan flu or Kung flu or China virus, these words are not harmless. And not to get too deep in the weeds with statistics, but over from 2019 to 2020, overall, there's been an 8% decrease in hate crimes across the United States. In that same period of time, there's been a 150% increase in hate crimes against Asian Americans. There is a direct correlation between the pandemic and the not so thinly veiled suggestion that the pandemic is being caused by Asians. So that's my parting thought. Words do matter, and we as attorneys, we certainly have an obligation to be careful about our words and to take whatever steps we can to ensure that there is impartial access to the justice system. We've all taken that oath. This is our obligation to our self-regulating profession.
And I would just add, you know, we talked a lot about allyship, and I think that's really important to have somebody that supports you. Just because, hey, that's not my problem, you know, this is a George Floyd issue, not my problem, right? But at some point, it's going to be your problem, right? And you have to support each other, and you have to support, you know, other groups. Because, you know, like I wouldn't be where I am without allies. I have my network and my support. I had my affinity group. I have my Asian bar. I have a lot of different things, but allies are important. You know, they're the folks that are helping you. They're the folks that are pulling you through. They're the folks that look different than you that are saying, hey, that's not right. Or, hey, you need to do this or you need to do that. So, you know, allyship, I think, is something that's key. Something that's important, that, you know, we all, if we see something that's wrong, at the end of the day, all of this is rooted in some sort of either misconception at best or hate at worst, right? So if you see something, you know, let's call it out, even if it's not us that's being impacted. It's not the Asian group. I know we're talking about Asian hate today, but, you know, this I think, you know, goes in all the settings. If you see something that is wrong, let's call it out. And let's, you know, us as lawyers, we have voices and we have resources, and we have networks and connections that where we can say something and do something and at least have a little bit more of an impact than general population.
Thank you so much. Anyone else have any parting thoughts for our audience on anything that we've discussed today? Okay. All right. Well, this was such a great discussion. We tackled some very important issues. We talked about some difficult topics. And I hope that we provided our viewers with a good array of resources to go to. There's a ton of information in the Zoom chat with different links, with different organizations, with different ideas on where to go to educate oneself. There are links on where to go for help if you feel that you are a target of a biased incident or a hate crime. And we had a great panel today. We really appreciate everyone taking the time to be on the panel today, and of course, all the attendees for attending this very important event on this very important topic. And remember that whatever you have taken away from today's discussion, whatever you have learned, don't leave it here. Take it with you and think on it. And think about what you learned today that you didn't know an hour ago. And what are you going to do with those things? Don't leave it here. What are you going to do with the things that you learn? Are you going to go to the library and check out a book that was discussed? Are you going to reach out to Elaine and talk to her about volunteering and how you can help? Are you going to reach out to one of the panelists to get some ideas? Are you going to go to the AABA website later today and see what resources they can do? Don't leave it here. We all have work to do, whether we identify as Asian Americans or whether we identify as an ally or both, right? I'm an Asian American, but I'm an ally to East Asian Americans and to Black Americans and so forth. So you can be somebody who is of a demographic that is diverse, but you can also be an ally. And please just don't leave those thoughts here today, because it's good that you were here, but in order to fight the good fight, we all have to do our part. So take what you learn, don't leave it here, and thank you so much for attending.